The seatbelt light blinked on as the plane cut through a stretch of gray clouds. Richard Hale gripped the armrest, not out of fear, but anticipation. 50 years old, heart repaired twice, and here he was, chasing a woman he'd never met, halfway across the world. He looked out the oval window, seeing nothing but endless blue. Somewhere down there, he imagined, Mariah was waiting. He'd replayed her voice messages so many times he knew every pause, every soft laugh. "You'll know me by my yellow dress," she'd said. "And the scar on my wrist, the one you said looks like a crescent moon." He'd smiled when she told him that, imagining tracing that scar one day. Now, with the Caribbean sun waiting below, he felt young again, foolish maybe, but alive. The flight attendant passed with a tray of coffee. He declined, clutching the velvet box hidden in his jacket pocket. The ring wasn't expensive, just a thin gold band with a sapphire, but it meant something. A promise. A second chance after a divorce that had hollowed him out. He remembered the first time Mariah messaged him on the dating app. Her profile picture, soft brown eyes, a waterfall behind her, sunlight in her hair. She'd said she was from Montego Bay, working in social outreach for disabled children. Her words were kind, her humor dry, and her patience endless. For months, she'd written to him every night, long after midnight, their messages becoming a quiet ritual. Still, there were things that never quite added up. She'd dodged every video call, claiming her phone camera was cracked. Sometimes, her voice sounded distant, like it echoed in a large room. But she'd always calm him with that gentle tone. "I'm real, Richard. You'll see. You'll know." Now, the plane began its descent. His palms were slick. The woman next to him, a tourist in a floral hat, smiled nervously as the engine roared. "First time in Jamaica?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "First time meeting someone?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh, how romantic." He gave a weak laugh. "I hope so." When the wheels kissed the tarmac, something in him shifted. The anticipation that had once thrilled him now trembled with doubt. He checked his phone the second the seatbelt light went off. One new message. "My cousin will pick you up. His name's Dwayne. I can't wait to see you." No mention of the yellow dress. No location. Just that. At the arrivals gate, the air was heavy with heat and the scent of salt. Tourists swarmed toward taxis and vans, laughing, shouting. Richard scanned every face, searching for her, the woman he'd built dreams around. But instead, a tall man in a faded blue shirt stood holding a sign, "Mr. Hale." Dwayne. He shook Richard's hand, firm and silent, his dark eyes unreadable. "Miss Mariah sends her apologies," he said in a low tone. "She not feeling strong today. She say to bring you to her home." Richard hesitated. "She's all right." Dwayne shrugged. "She just need rest." As they drove away from the airport, the noise faded. The roads narrowed, the sea appearing and vanishing through gaps in the palms. Houses thinned out until only trees and wind remained. Richard stared out the window, his heart a restless drum. "How far is it?" "Not far," Dwayne said. "Her house by the sea. Quiet place." The farther they went, the more Richard felt the weight of distance. From his old life, his old logic, his old safety. The world outside was beautiful but lonely, and the voice of reason he'd silenced for months began to whisper again. When they turned down a dirt road lined with mangroves, he saw it, a weathered wooden house perched above the shoreline, its windows glowing faintly in the dusk. Dwayne stopped the car. "We here." Richard stepped out, the salty wind hitting his face. He could hear the sea breathing below the cliffs. Somewhere inside, a curtain moved, a shadow passing behind it. He took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and touched the ring box in his pocket. It was time to meet her. The gravel crunched under Richard's shoes as he followed Dwayne toward the house. The sea hissed beyond the cliff, wind carrying the faint scent of salt and something metallic, like rust or blood. The place was quiet except for the wooden wind chime that clattered against the porch. "Miss Mariah inside," Dwayne said, unlocking the gate. "She waitin', but she say give her few minutes." Richard nodded, clutching his small suitcase. The house looked older than he'd imagined from the photos, weather-beaten boards, shutters half-hanging, a porch chair swaying gently in the breeze. It didn't look like the home of a young, lively woman. It looked like a secret trying to stay hidden. Inside, the air was cool and damp. A faint hum came from somewhere, maybe a generator. On the wall, photographs lined up unevenly, smiling children, a woman by the sea, a dog with mismatched eyes. He recognized Mariah's face in some of them, though in a few, her smile seemed forced, like someone had told her to pose. "You can wait here," Dwayne said, pointing toward a wicker chair in the small sitting room. "She'll call when she's ready." Richard sat down, his pulse fluttering. "You've known her long?" Dwayne's eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. "Long enough." Then he turned and disappeared through a back door. Left alone, Richard tried to steady his breathing. The ceiling fan turned lazily, its rhythm slow and hypnotic. From the open window, he could hear waves smashing against rocks far below. He checked his phone, no signal. The screen showed only searching. He looked around again. On a small table sat a cracked porcelain vase holding wilted orchids. A faint melody drifted from another room, soft piano notes, uneven, like someone playing with trembling fingers. He almost called out but stopped when he heard it, a voice, faint and tired. "Richard." He froze. The voice came again, from behind a half-closed door at the end of the hallway. He rose slowly, walking toward it. The air grew colder with each step. "I'm here," he said quietly. The door creaked open. Inside, the light was dim. A figure sat by the window, her back to him. Her hair was longer than in the photos, darker too. A thin shawl draped over her shoulders. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said. Her voice, unmistakable. The same warmth, the same lilting accent that had kept him awake for months. He smiled, even as his throat tightened. "I'd know your voice anywhere." She didn't turn immediately. Instead, she adjusted something at her side, a faint squeak of metal echoing. When she finally faced him, the breath left his body. Mariah sat in a wheelchair. Her eyes met his, bright, searching, filled with apology. "I should have told you. I wanted to. But I was afraid you wouldn't come." He took a step forward, words catching in his throat. "What happened?" "An accident," she whispered. "A long time ago." Silence lingered between them, broken only by the sound of the ocean outside. He forced a smile. "You're still you. That's what matters." Her lips trembled. "You say that now. But people change their hearts when they see the truth." "I won't," he said firmly. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, something like relief flickered across her face. Then the door behind her opened, and a middle-aged woman entered, short, tired-looking, her eyes wary. "This is Ruth," Mariah said. "She helps me." Ruth nodded, barely glancing at him. "Dinner soon," she murmured before slipping away again. The sun dipped lower, casting orange light through the blinds. Shadows stretched across the floor like fingers reaching toward them. Mariah turned back to the window. "It's good you're here, Richard," she said softly. "It's been too long since anyone stayed in this house." Her words lingered, anyone stayed. Outside, the sea roared, louder now, like a warning whispered through the wind. And somewhere behind the thin walls, Richard thought he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving in a room where no one should be. The evening light had turned the sea outside into a sheet of dull copper. Richard sat at the small dining table, watching Mariah guide her wheelchair with effortless grace. The wheels made a faint whisper against the old wooden floor. She moved with practiced precision, but something in her motion, too careful, too slow, made him wonder how long she'd been this way. Ruth set down 2 plates of curried chicken and rice, the smell rich and spiced. She didn't speak, didn't meet his eyes. After serving, she disappeared into the kitchen, the sound of the closing door echoing a little too sharply. Mariah smiled faintly. "She's protective of me," she said, breaking the silence. "Sometimes too much." Richard nodded, trying to relax. "I understand. It must be hard for both of you." She gave a small laugh, soft, broken at the edges. "Hard doesn't begin to cover it." He watched her lift her fork carefully, her hands trembling just slightly. In the photograph she'd sent, She'd always been standing, leaning against palm trees, posing in sunlit gardens. Seeing her like this made those images feel like lies wrapped in sunlight. "I never wanted to deceive you," she said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "But when I met you online, I thought, maybe I could be someone else. Someone whole again." Richard looked down at his plate. "You are whole, Mariah. None of that changes who you are." Her eyes glistened, the light catching them like wet glass. "You say that now." He reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. Her skin was cold. She didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. She hesitated, then drew a deep breath. 3 years ago. A car accident. I was driving home from work. It was raining, hard. I swerved to avoid a dog, hit a tree, and woke up here in this chair. The doctors said I was lucky to live." She paused, her gaze distant. "I didn't feel lucky." He listened in silence. There was something too smooth in her telling, too rehearsed. Still, the sadness in her voice felt real, raw in its exhaustion. "And the man in the photos?" he asked gently. "The one standing beside you?" Her jaw tensed. "That was before. He left when I couldn't walk. He said he couldn't live with a ghost of who I used to be." The pain in her tone caught him off guard. He didn't push further. They ate in quiet, the sound of waves filling the space between them. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. The whole house seemed to breathe, slow, heavy, unsettled. After dinner, Mariah insisted on showing him the porch. Dwayne had returned by then, standing by his car, smoking a cigarette. He didn't look their way. Mariah rolled to the edge of the porch, staring at the horizon where the last light bled into the sea. "I come here every evening," she said. "It reminds me that things still move even when I can't." Richard stood beside her, the smell of salt and damp wood around them. "It's beautiful," he murmured. She smiled, but her eyes were fixed on something beyond the waves. "Beauty doesn't always mean peace," she whispered. He turned to her. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the window behind them, where a faint reflection flickered. For a moment, Richard thought he saw another face there, shadowed and watching. But when he looked again, it was gone. "I should rest," Mariah said, her voice smaller now. "It's been a long day." He helped her inside, wheeling her gently to her room. Ruth appeared silently at the end of the hallway, taking over without a word. "Good night, Richard," Mariah said softly. "Tomorrow we'll talk more. There's still so much you don't know about me." He smiled, though unease curled in his chest. "I'll be here." As Ruth closed the door behind them, Richard turned toward his guest room. The air felt thicker now, the walls groaning under the ocean wind. Just as he was about to switch off the lamp, he heard something, a soft creak, then a faint whisper. It came from Mariah's room. At first, it sounded like her voice, low, pleading. But then another voice joined in. A man's. Angry, sharp, commanding. Richard froze. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving only the hiss of the sea. He sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, staring at the closed door down the hall. Someone else was in that house. The house slept beneath a veil of ocean wind. The waves outside rose and fell like slow breathing, but Richard couldn't rest. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows sway each time the fan creaked. Somewhere beyond the wall, he thought he heard movement, soft, deliberate, as if someone were pacing the hallway. He told himself it was the house settling, the sea air pushing through the old wood. Yet when he closed his eyes, the sound came again. A whisper. Then another. 2 voices. One Mariah's, the other low, male, angry. Richard sat up, pulse thudding. He strained to listen. "Stop it," Mariah's voice hissed. "Not tonight. Please." Then the man's voice, sharp, quiet, full of threat. "You shouldn't have brought him here." Richard's stomach turned. He swung his legs over the bed and moved to the door, careful not to let the floorboards creak. He followed the faint glow at the end of the hallway, stopping near Mariah's room. The door was half closed, light spilling through the gap. Through it, he saw Ruth standing stiffly, hands clasped together, eyes glistening. Mariah sat in her chair near the window, her face pale under the lamplight. A tall figure stood before her, the man whose voice Richard had heard. "I told you," the man said, his accent thick, tone low. "He can't stay." Mariah's voice trembled. "He's not like the others. He won't hurt anyone." "Everyone hurts someone," the man replied coldly. Ruth turned suddenly, spotting movement in the hall. The door slammed shut before Richard could react. He stumbled back, heart hammering. For a moment, the entire house went still again. No voices, no sound but the wind. He stood there frozen until the lamp inside flicked off. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Back in his room, he locked the door and sat against it, trembling. Who was that man? A relative? An ex? Someone who lived here? The questions chased themselves in circles. He thought of confronting Dwayne in the morning, but even that seemed uncertain, if Dwayne was still around. Hours passed. The waves outside turned violent, crashing like distant thunder. Somewhere in the darkness, a door creaked open again. Richard froze. Soft wheels rolled along the hallway, Mariah's chair. "Richard." Her voice came faintly through the wood. "Are you awake?" He hesitated, then answered. "Yes." The door opened slowly. She sat there in the dim light, her face half hidden by shadow. Her hands gripped the rims of her wheels tightly. "I'm sorry if we woke you," she whispered. "Ruth and I were arguing. About the house, about money. Nothing serious." He studied her expression, too calm, too rehearsed. "There was someone else," he said quietly. "A man." She froze for half a second, then smiled thinly. "No. Maybe you heard the radio." "There was no music," he said. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. She looked down at her hands. "It's late. You should sleep." Before he could answer, she turned the chair and rolled back down the hall. The wheels squeaked softly until the sound disappeared into the distance. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, staring after her. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly in the room, jasmine and something sharp beneath it, like smoke. When he finally drifted into a restless half-sleep, he dreamed of the same scene, Mariah at the window, whispering to someone he couldn't see. A man's silhouette behind her, reaching toward her neck. He woke just before dawn, drenched in sweat. The house was silent again, gray light seeping through the curtains. But outside his door, in the dust along the floorboards, he saw something that made his breath catch, a single wet footprint. It led away from his room toward the sea-facing hallway. Morning came with the sound of gulls and waves gnawing at the rocks below. Richard hadn't slept more than an hour. The memory of that single footprint haunted him, fresh, damp, human. Yet when he stepped into the hallway, it was gone. The boards were clean, the dust undisturbed, as if the house had swallowed the evidence overnight. He found Ruth in the kitchen stirring porridge, her shoulders stiff. "Did someone come by last night?" he asked carefully. She didn't look up. "No one comes here." "I heard voices." "A man's voice." The spoon paused mid-stir, then resumed. "Sometimes the sea carries sound. Makes you hear what not there." He waited for her to meet his eyes, but she never did. When she finally slid a bowl toward him, she whispered, "Best not to ask too many questions in this place, Mr. Hale." Her words chilled him more than they warned. After breakfast, he stepped outside. The air was heavy with humidity, the sky a pale wash of blue. Dwayne's car was gone, and Mariah's wheelchair tracks marked the porch, leading toward the side garden. But when he looked for her, the path ended abruptly near a shed, the kind of small, locked structure that invited curiosity. He hesitated, then turned back toward the house. Inside, Mariah was in the sitting room, her back to him, gazing out the window toward the sea. "You didn't rest," she said without turning. "I couldn't," he admitted. "You didn't either." Her hand tightened on the wheel rim. "Some nights don't let you sleep." He wanted to ask about the man again, but her tone warned him off. Instead, he changed the subject. "You said you worked with children. I saw photos on the wall. They're beautiful." That made her turn. "You looked through my things?" "I just noticed them walking in," he said quickly. "That's all." Her eyes softened. "Those were good days." before everything changed. She wheeled herself toward the porch, signaling the conversation was over. When she left, Richard found himself drawn to the hallway again. The photographs he'd seen on the first day were still there, crooked, sun-faded. But one frame, the one nearest the stairs, hung slightly open. Behind it, the corner of another photo peeked out. He pulled it free. It was Mariah, standing, smiling, her hand around a man's waist. The man wasn't a stranger. It was Dwayne. In the picture, she wasn't in a wheelchair. She was barefoot on the same porch where they'd stood last night. The date printed in the corner read 2021. Only 2 years ago. Richard's breath caught. He flipped through the other frames, more hidden photos tucked behind the displayed ones. In some, Mariah was in the same red dress she described to him once, laughing, walking, dancing. In another, she sat on Dwayne's car hood, her hand resting on his shoulder. He felt the air grow colder. When he heard the creak behind him, he turned. Ruth stood there, her face pale, eyes darting toward the photos in his hand. "You shouldn't touch those," she said sharply. "Why hide them?" he demanded. "Why pretend she's—" "Stop." Her voice broke. "Please, Mr. Hale. You don't understand what you're walking into." He stepped closer. "Then explain it to me." Ruth's eyes glistened with something between fear and guilt. "She's not who you think she is. None of us are." Before he could press further, the front door opened. Dwayne entered, carrying a bag of fruit, his gaze shifting from Richard to the photos in his hand. His smile was gone. "You going through people things now?" Dwayne asked quietly. Richard met his stare. "I just want the truth." Dwayne dropped the bag on the table, fruit rolling across the floor. "Truth don't help you here. Best you leave before you become part of the story." The words froze him. Part of what story? But Dwayne didn't answer. He turned, muttering to Ruth in low Jamaican patois, words Richard couldn't follow. When Richard looked back toward the window, Mariah was outside again, staring up at the house, unmoving. The sunlight hit her face just right, and for a second he thought he saw something behind her calm expression, a flicker of warning. Or guilt. He stepped toward the glass, wanting to call out to her. But before he could, she turned her chair and rolled back toward the shed at the edge of the property, disappearing behind the trees. Richard's pulse quickened. He didn't know what secrets that small locked shed held, but something told him he'd find the answers there, or something worse. The afternoon light spilled through the slatted windows, slicing the room into gold and shadow. Richard hadn't seen Mariah since she disappeared toward the shed that morning. Dwayne had left again without a word, and Ruth moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding his eyes. The silence pressed against his chest until he couldn't stand it any longer. He walked down the narrow path toward the shed. The smell of seaweed and damp wood grew stronger with every step. When he reached the door, he found it slightly ajar. Inside, dust floated in the thin light filtering through a crack in the roof. Wooden crates lined the walls, and in one corner sat Mariah, not in her wheelchair, but on the floor. She looked up when she heard him. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same," he replied softly. Her eyes glistened, though she tried to hide it. "I come here when I need to remember." "Remember what?" She hesitated, then gestured to a wooden box beside her. Inside lay a stack of framed photographs, different from the ones in the house. These were darker, older, corners worn and stained. Richard picked one up. Mariah stood beside a man in uniform, smiling faintly, holding a small child. The date in the corner read 2018. "That's my husband," she said quietly. "Ellis." Richard froze. The name felt heavy in the air. "You told me he left you after the accident." Her jaw trembled. "He did. But not before breaking every part of me that could still feel alive." She looked out the window, voice trembling but steady. "He was charming at first, generous, protective. Everyone thought he adored me. Then he started to change. The shouting, the nights he wouldn't come home. When I finally tried to leave, he followed me to work, to friends' houses. He told me I'd never walk away from him." Richard's throat tightened. "So the crash," she nodded. "He was driving. Drunk. I told the police it was an accident because I thought he'd kill me if I didn't." When I woke up in the hospital, he was gone. Just gone. She lifted her hands, staring at them as though they belonged to someone else. People pitied me. They called me brave. But no one knew I was still scared, every day, that he'd come back. Richard knelt beside her. You don't have to be afraid anymore. A faint smile crossed her lips. You think fear listens to reason? He wanted to comfort her, to say something that would erase the pain in her eyes, but words felt useless. Instead, he reached for her hand. It was cold, trembling slightly, but she didn't pull away. You were kind to me, she whispered. Kinder than anyone has been in years. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see me as broken. You're not broken, Mariah. Her eyes flicked toward him, uncertain. Then why do I still feel like he owns the air I breathe? Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was still clear. The sea wind howled through the crack in the shed wall, carrying the faint sound of gulls. I came here to start over, she said softly. I thought maybe love could heal the rest. But love doesn't always come clean, does it? Richard shook his head. No, it doesn't. But it can still be real. Her lips curved in something between a smile and a sigh. Maybe. They sat in silence, the weight of her confession hanging between them. Finally she whispered, Ruth worries you'll leave. I told her you wouldn't. I won't, he said. Not until I know you're safe. For the first time, she looked at him fully, no mask, no smile. Then you should know, she said, voice trembling, safety doesn't exist here. Not since Ellis came back. The words hit him like cold water. Came back. Mariah's eyes darted toward the doorway. You heard him last night, didn't you? The man's voice. Richard's breath caught. That was him. She nodded, tears spilling now. He found me. He said if I ever tried to start over, he'd make sure no one believed what I said. That's why Ruth stays. She's the only one who's seen what he can do. The shed door banged open suddenly. Ruth stood there, face pale. He's here, she whispered. Ellis. He's come again. Mariah's body went rigid. Richard rose slowly, every nerve in his body alive with dread. Outside, a car engine idled, low and threatening, beneath the crash of waves. The sound of the engine outside was low and steady, like a predator waiting. Richard stepped out of the shed, his pulse thudding in his ears. The sunlight had dimmed behind thick gray clouds, and the air smelled of salt and rain. A black SUV sat on the dirt road, its headlights still on. The door opened slowly and a man climbed out. Ellis. He was taller than Richard expected, broad-shouldered, with tan skin and a face that had once been handsome but was now hardened by years of anger. His hair, streaked with gray, clung damply to his forehead. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the ground beneath him. Well, Ellis drawled, eyes scanning the scene. Richard, Ruth frozen by the doorway, and Mariah trembling in her wheelchair just inside the shed. Didn't think I'd find company here. His voice was smooth, casual, but there was venom under every word. Richard took a step forward, his body instinctively tense. You must be Ellis. Ellis smirked. You must be the replacement. Leave, Richard said quietly. Ellis laughed, not loudly, but enough to make the air feel colder. You think you can tell me what to do? You don't know a damn thing about her. He looked past Richard, his eyes softening, almost tender, when they met Mariah's. You still keep my pictures, sweetheart? Still dream about me? Mariah's voice cracked. Get out, Ellis. After all we shared? He took a slow step forward. After I gave you everything? Everything. Richard barked. You destroyed her. Ellis turned his head toward Richard, the smirk gone. You know what's funny? Every man thinks he's her savior. You think she didn't tell me the same lies she's telling you now? Poor little Mariah, helpless, broken, begging for someone to fix her. But she's a performer, friend. Always has been. Richard's fists tightened. You're lying. Ellis's expression darkened. Am I? You ever ask her about the night of the crash? About the man who died in the other car? A flicker of confusion crossed Richard's face. He looked at Mariah. She'd gone pale, lips trembling. Tell him, sweetheart, Ellis whispered. Tell him who was really driving. Mariah shook her head violently. Don't. Ellis took another step forward. You see, I told the cops I was driving because I thought she'd suffer enough. But truth? She was behind the wheel. Drunk. Screaming. Said she wished we'd both die before the car hit the ditch. I woke up in flames. She woke up with pity. Stop. Mariah's voice rose, breaking into a sob. But Ellis wasn't done. He leaned closer to Richard, voice low and steady. You didn't fall in love with a victim. You fell for a murderer. Richard's stomach twisted. He turned toward Mariah, searching her face. Is that true? Tears streamed down her cheeks. It's not what you think. He twisted everything. Ellis chuckled darkly. Of course she'll say that. She always does. Before Richard could speak again, Ruth stepped between them. Her frail hands trembled, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. You've done enough, Ellis. Leave before I call the police. Ellis's jaw clenched. You think they'll believe you? After everything she's done? After everything you've hidden? Ruth's face went white, but she didn't move. For a long, tense moment, the wind howled between them. Then Ellis backed away, his smile returning. Fine. I'll go. But this isn't over. You can't bury the truth forever, sweetheart. It always floats back up. He turned, climbed into his SUV, and drove off, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires echoing down the road until it vanished into the wind. Richard stood frozen, his breath shallow. The sea crashed against the rocks below, wild and relentless. He turned to Mariah, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. What did he mean? He whispered. About the man who died? Mariah closed her eyes, whispering through tears, Please, Richard, don't make me tell you tonight. He wanted to press, to demand answers, but the look on her face, a mixture of fear and unbearable shame, stopped him cold. Ruth gently took Mariah's hand and began pushing her back toward the house. Come, she said quietly. There's more you need to know. But not out here. As they disappeared inside, Richard remained alone by the shed, his thoughts spinning. The image of Ellis's cold smile replayed in his mind, and the words you fell for a murderer echoed louder than the sea. A gust of wind slammed the shed door shut behind him, and for a moment he thought he heard faint laughter in the distance. Rain began just after dusk, washing the dust from the air and replacing it with a damp, heavy silence. Inside the house, the atmosphere was brittle, like one wrong word could shatter everything. Mariah had retreated to her room upstairs, the door closed. Ruth sat in the kitchen, staring into a cup of untouched tea. Richard stood by the window, watching the rain bead down the glass. The conversation with Ellis replayed in his mind, over and over. The accusation, the smirk, the doubt. Every word had left a bruise. He turned suddenly. Ruth, he said quietly, what did he mean about what you've hidden? She didn't answer at first. Only the sound of rain tapping against the tin roof filled the silence. Finally, she exhaled. You shouldn't have met him. Once Ellis gets inside someone's head, he never leaves. That's not an answer. Ruth looked up, her eyes tired. Some truths don't belong to me to tell. Richard's voice hardened. Then whose? Her gaze drifted toward the dark hallway leading to Mariah's room. You'll understand soon enough. Just don't go upstairs tonight. That warning only made the air feel heavier. Why? Ruth's expression faltered, but she said nothing. Later, when she went to bed, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the locked door. The house was quiet except for the distant waves and the creak of old wood in the wind. He walked down the hall, barefoot on the cool floorboards, until he stood before Mariah's room. The door was closed, just as Ruth had said. A strip of light leaked from the bottom. He hesitated, then gently turned the handle. But, Mariah, he whispered. No response. He knocked softly. It's me. Please, I just want to talk. Still nothing. He was about to walk away when he heard it, a faint noise from inside. Not a cry, not words, but the sound of metal scraping against wood. Then a low, muffled sob. His pulse quickened. He bent down, peering through the old keyhole. All he could see was dim lamplight and the edge of a chair. Then, a shadow moved, slow, trembling. He caught a glimpse of Mariah's reflection in the mirror. She was out of her wheelchair, dragging herself across the floor, clutching something small and metallic in her hands. "Mariah," he called, panic flaring. The sound stopped. For a few seconds, silence. Then her voice, soft, shaky. "Go back downstairs, Richard." "What are you doing?" "Please," she whispered. "Don't look at me like this." He pressed his forehead against the door. "I just want to understand. You don't have to hide." Her breathing on the other side was uneven. "It's not hiding if the truth can destroy you," Ellis said. "Ellis lies," she snapped, the sudden burst of anger cracking through the quiet. Then softer, "but not always." He waited, listening to her sobs fade into quiet muttering. A faint clink of glass followed, then silence again. "Mariah," he whispered. No response this time. Only the wind outside, rattling the shutters. He stepped back, unsure whether to force the door open. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but his hand wouldn't move. Finally, he turned away and went downstairs, every step heavier than the last. Back in the kitchen, he noticed Ruth's cup still on the table, but now something lay beside it. A small, rusted key. He picked it up, frowning. On a torn slip of paper beneath it were 3 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "For when she's ready." The thunder cracked outside, shaking the windows. Richard looked up toward the dark staircase, the locked door above, and the key trembling in his palm. Whatever truth Mariah was hiding, it was waiting behind that door, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know it. The storm hadn't stopped by morning. Rain poured in sheets, drumming against the roof and drowning out the world outside. Richard hadn't slept. The key lay on the table beside him, catching flashes of lightning through the window. Every time thunder shook the house, it felt like the sound was coming from inside him. By dawn, he couldn't wait any longer. He climbed the stairs slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet. The hallway was dim, and the air smelled faintly of salt and old wood. He paused before Mariah's door. The light beneath it was gone. Only silence now. He held his breath, pressed the key into the lock and turned it. The click was soft, too soft for something that heavy. Inside, the curtains were drawn, the air still and cold. Mariah sat in her wheelchair facing the window, wrapped in a gray shawl. On the small table beside her sat an old cassette recorder, its red light blinking faintly. She didn't turn when he entered. "You shouldn't be here." He stepped closer. "You left me no choice." Mariah's voice was quiet but steady. "I know. That's why I left the key." He hesitated. "You wanted me to find it?" She nodded, still staring out at the rain. "Because I can't keep pretending anymore. You deserve to know who I am before Ellis tells you his version." "Then tell me," Richard said softly. "Tell me everything." She exhaled, a shaky sound that seemed to carry years of exhaustion. "The night of the crash, it wasn't how I told you. Ellis and I had been fighting for months. He'd found messages from someone else, a man I'd been writing to online. I never met him, but Ellis called it cheating. He took the keys and told me we were going for a drive, to talk it out." Her eyes filled with tears, though she didn't wipe them away. "We argued the whole time. I told him I was leaving him for good. He laughed, said I wouldn't survive a day without him. Then he grabbed the wheel." Richard's chest tightened. "You said he was driving." She nodded. "He was. But when I tried to take control, we hit another car. It spun into a ditch. There was fire. Screaming. I thought we were both going to die." Lightning flashed, illuminating her pale face. "When I woke up, Ellis was gone," she whispered. "The police said there was only one survivor, me. But later, I found out the other driver didn't make it. A young man. 24. He'd been on his way home from his sister's wedding." Her voice broke. "I saw his picture in the paper. His name was Aaron Vale. And here's the truth, Richard, he was the man I'd been talking to online." Richard's heart stopped. "The one Ellis found out about?" She nodded slowly. "I never told anyone. The guilt, it ate at me. I told the police Ellis was driving because I thought it was the only way to live with myself. But Ellis came back months later, saying he'd lied for me. That he'd covered for me. And if I ever told anyone the truth, he'd destroy me. She turned her head toward him finally. Her eyes looked hollow, like she'd been carrying this secret too long. So I let him haunt me. I let him own my silence. Richard stepped closer, the room spinning around him. You didn't kill him, Mariah. It was an accident. She shook her head. No. It was punishment. For pretending to love someone I'd never met, for lying to myself about what I wanted. She reached for the cassette recorder, pressing play. A hiss of static filled the room, followed by Ellis's voice, cold, taunting. You think anyone will believe you, Mariah? You think they won't see what you are? I've got everything recorded. The calls, the letters, the truth. You'll never escape me. Mariah stopped the tape. He's been blackmailing me for years. Every time I tried to move on, he'd send another recording. That's why I never told you. Because love, for me, only brings ghosts. Richard knelt beside her, tears burning his eyes. You could have trusted me. She looked at him sadly. I did. That's why I told you now. Because Ellis isn't just threatening anymore. He's coming tonight. He froze. What do you mean? He called early this morning, she whispered. Said he wants the tapes back. Said if I don't give them to him, he'll make sure you're the one who pays. Outside, thunder roared again, shaking the walls. Richard rose, his jaw tightening. Then let him come. Mariah's eyes widened. You don't understand. Ellis never leaves without taking something, or someone. He turned toward the door, every nerve alive with dread and determination. Then he's about to learn what happens when you take too much. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world outside wet and glistening. The ocean stretched endlessly, silver under the pale moonlight, waves lapping gently at the shore. Richard stood barefoot on the damp sand, the wet grains clinging to his skin. Mariah had insisted they walk, a quiet moment before the storm of Ellis's return. She moved slowly, using her wheelchair modified for sand, her hands steady on the rims. Her face was serene, almost fragile in the moonlight, and Richard felt a pang of guilt for the days he'd doubted her strength. Look, she whispered, pointing toward the shoreline. See those footprints? Richard followed her gaze. 2 sets of prints stretched along the beach, hers, and beside them his. She smiled faintly. They remind me, someone is here with me. Someone who won't leave. He looked at her, trying to memorize the moment. The ocean breeze tugged at her hair, the sand cool beneath their feet, the sound of the waves washing away fear, even if just for a moment. I don't know if he'll come tonight, she said softly, her voice almost drowned by the sea. Ellis. He has ways of finding us, even when we think we're safe. Richard reached for her hand, warm despite the night air. Then we'll face him together. I won't let him harm you again. Mariah's eyes glistened with tears. I've dreamed of this. Being free. Feeling safe. Feeling normal. But dreams don't stop people like him. A gull cried above, and for a second, Richard imagined the world beyond this beach. Normalcy, peace, days without fear. But reality waited in the shadows. The footprints in the sand were temporary, like fragile promises. The tide would wash them away, just as the past always seemed to catch up. He squeezed her hand. Then we make new footprints, together. No matter what comes, we face it. Mariah nodded, swallowing hard. I don't want you hurt because of me. You won't be, he said firmly, his jaw tight with resolve. Tonight, I stand between you and him. They rolled closer to the water's edge. The waves licked at the sand, tiny foamy tongues washing around their ankles. The footprints stretched behind them, marked by effort, courage, and the weight of the past. Richard traced them briefly with his foot, then looked at her. Every footprint tells a story, he said. And ours isn't over yet. Mariah smiled faintly, her lips trembling. I want to believe that. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the vast, empty shoreline. Shadows danced across the dunes, reminding them that danger was never far. The beach, beautiful as it was, offered no protection. It was only a threshold, a place to gather courage before the storm. Richard inhaled the salty air deeply. We go back now, he said, gently guiding her wheelchair toward the house. Ellis comes tonight, but he won't find us weak. Mariah's grip tightened on his hand. Promise me we'll survive this. I promise, he whispered. The footprints behind them remained, fading slowly as the tide crept higher, each wave erasing the evidence of their past steps. Yet the promise they carried, to face the storm, to confront the truth, to protect each other, remained unbroken. As they reached the porch, the wind shifted, carrying a faint rumble from the distance. The waves crashed louder, almost in warning. Richard glanced at Mariah, determination etched into his features. No more running, he said. Tonight it ends. Weeks had passed since that night. The storm had left the house battered but standing. Richard and Mariah spent their days repairing, talking, learning to trust the world, and each other, again. The ocean roared outside, steady and relentless, a reminder that some forces were impossible to control. Ellis was gone for now. The authorities had tracked his vehicle, confirmed he had fled the island after a confrontation with local police. Richard had stayed by Mariah's side every moment, refusing to leave, refusing to let her past haunt her again. Yet even in peace, unease lingered like a shadow. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Mariah's phone buzzed. She hesitated, then unlocked it. The message came from an unknown number. I know what you did. Don't think you're safe. Her hands trembled. Richard reached over, taking the phone from her, examining the message. It was typed, simple, but the threat carried the weight of memory, Ellis's voice embedded in every word. They never stop, he said quietly. Even when you think it's over, they find a way back. Mariah leaned against him, shivering despite the humid night air. I can't live like this forever, she whispered. Even if he's gone, the messages, the fear, it stays. Richard hugged her tightly. Then we live anyway. We survive. Together. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves crash below. The faint glow of the moon lit her face, pale but peaceful. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Another warning. Richard ignored it, slipping the device into his pocket. He refused to give the shadow more power than it already had. Do you ever think he'll stop? Mariah asked softly, tracing the rim of his hand with her fingers. Richard shook his head. No. But we'll face it every time. We'll make our footprints anyway. And one day, they won't scare us anymore. She closed her eyes, leaning into him, letting the rhythm of the ocean soothe her. The wind tugged at the curtains, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, a whisper of memory, a reminder that Ellis, or someone like him, was still out there. But for the first time, Richard realized something crucial. The fear was no longer theirs to own. The choice had shifted. They could live, despite it. They could move forward. The messages would come. The memories would linger. But so would courage, love, and survival. And as the night deepened, Richard held Mariah tighter, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The story ends with the echo of the sea, relentless and eternal, a witness to both horror and resilience.